My name is Anne Ray. I'm the managing editor of Zoetrope All Story, and I am really so thrilled to have the chance today to talk to Shirin Neshat, who designed our current spring 2023 edition of All Story. For anyone who's unfamiliar with the magazine, Zoetrope All Story is a literary and art journal founded by Francis Coppola in 1997 to showcase the affinities between short stories and film. Francis shares Alfred Hitchcock's conviction that the short story is the art form most akin to film because both are meant to be consumed in a single sitting. In 1998, to manifest the collaborative nature of filmmaking, Francis initiated the idea of the guest designer, whereby we would invite a leading artist to design each issue of the magazine in its entirety. Some of our past guest designers include Agnes Varda, Matt Dillon, Zaha Hadid, Iggy Pop, Jim Jarmusch, PJ Harvey, Abbas Kiarostami, Kate and Laura Malevi of Rodarte, Mikhail Baryshnikov, Helmut Newton, David Lynch, and David Bowie, and that's just a few. We at All Story are longtime admirers of Shirin's work, and we really were delighted when she accepted our invitation to design the spring edition. As a brief introduction to Shirin, which probably none of you need, she's an Iranian-born artist and filmmaker who lives in New York City. She has directed 3 feature-length films, 2009's Women Without Men, for which she received the Silver Lion Award for Best Director at the Venice International Film Festival, Looking for Coutume in 2017, and Land of Dreams in 2021, which also premiered at the Venice International Film Festival. Her artwork has been featured in solo exhibitions around the world, and her honors include the Golden Lion Award First International Prize at the Venice Biennale, the Hiroshima Freedom Prize, the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize, and the Japan Art Association's Premium Imperial Award. And now I'd like to welcome Shirin Neshat. Hello, Shirin.
Thank you for having me, Anne.
Thank you so much for being here. I will go ahead and mention quickly that there will be a chance for audience questions later in the program. So at any time, please feel free to type a message into the chat or a question into the chat, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. So first of all, Shirin, when we started talking about your design for an issue, you were just finishing up preparations on an exhibition of new work at Gladstone Gallery in New York. And I was wondering, since we started work on this immediately after the opening, how did your work preparing for that exhibition influence or impact how you were approaching design for the magazine?
Well, first of all, I have to explain that my attraction to your publication was this cross-section between film and arts and literature. And that's exactly where I am. I'm always working between different disciplines. I've been a still photographer, video artist, filmmaker. I work on opera. I find myself writing to then taking pictures and editing videos and movies. And so I'm always very encouraged when I'm invited from something like that, a publication that was founded by Francis Coppola. For me, it was a great honor that I could be part of this roster of great artists that you had and filmmakers that you had invited before. But I knew I was making an exhibition that was a video and photographs, and generally every video I make, every film that I make extended storyboard, which is mood book or storyboard, because I'm actually better in making pictures tell the story than writing. So my immediate thought was, because for The Fury, which was exhibited at Gladstone in January, I really started with just images of other people's films and just created my own story. So I was really convinced that when we come to our project, that's the kind of shape it would take, more like a storyboard.
And I remember our first conversation, we were talking about these mood books that my understanding is you create one when you're beginning each project. Is that right?
Yes, in fact, it's very interesting, even starting with Woman Without Men or Looking for My Own Cosum, I had like 300 pages of they were more than a storyboard, they were the whole story. But it's a way to communicate with people what I have in mind, that it's not easy for me to express through words. This often means an emotion, production design, landscape, architecture, characters, period of time, where I may forget to put that in writing, but the choices I make by this assembly of images really helps me convey my ideas, and very often the final product, it's actually quite close to what I set out to do. So that's become my habit of working. Yeah.
Well, you did actually create kind of a mini mood book for us to communicate ideas about the design. So it was fun to get to see how that process works for you. And what you presented to us included a lot of images, some your own, some that you gathered from other sources. And that's, I mean, part of what made it so appealing, it was so evocative, and we felt like we understood immediately what you were going for. But also that led to some of our challenges when we started getting into the logistics of, okay, how do we put together this magazine? And we're raising questions of rights and permissions and sourcing the different pieces. And what was interesting to me is to see how we went from your initial mood book and even the images that you presented to the shape the magazine started taking. And even though it departed a bit from the mood book, it still really had those ideas and those images, and was really, it felt like an extension of what your original proposal was. And I wonder if you could talk about some of the ideas that were foundational to the design.
Yeah, the process was really interesting because originally I thought, well, I have this new idea that that the Land of Dreams is going to move on to the next phase, meaning the story will evolve into a sequel almost. And then I started to think about how for our project I could incorporate images that will show the character and the story now moving on to the next. But the problem was time, that when you develop a storyboard such as that, you need like a year, because as you develop the idea, you need to discuss it, change it, evolve it. You can't put out something that is totally disjointed and not cooked yet, especially for a feature film, because this idea I had was a feature film. But what I think that the decision we made was really good for many reasons. One is that even though the film stills were from existing work of Land of Dreams video installation, the selection that we made, it told the story to the audience who hadn't seen the video. It really sort of followed the journey of this woman in various landscapes, locations, architecture, and busy in different actions. So it did become like a journey, because Land of Dreams was all about the journey of this woman in Southwest, an incredible landscape, in her car with her camera. So I think what we decided was, how can we, particularly for the audience who has not seen Land of Dream video, because I remind to your audience that we have made a feature-length film with Land of Dreams, a double channel black and white for video, and 110 still photographs. So this really gave me a chance to sort of dismantle the way it was told before and tell the story in a new way, as in a book. And to add to that was the stories that you had incorporated as part of this issue by several women. And I thought that, again, the story that visually was all driven by a female character protagonist. And then it so nicely became integral part of the other ladies' writing. So I think the original idea that I had, I think it would have required a few years and it would have been a big book. But I'm very happy with the choices that we made, because when I look at this issue, I don't see it as this fragmented photographs by Shirin Neshat. Rather, I see that I'm telling a story, and there's a main protagonist, and the landscape built and natural landscape become very prominent also as a character.
Yeah, that is very much how it felt to us too. And I think, it's interesting. The images that you selected were from 4 different bodies of work. So Land of Dreams, like you said, a feature film installation, photographs, as well as 3 shorter films.
Yes.
Or video works, or
yes, I forgot to mention that because I had 3 previous videos called Roja, Sarah, and Illusion and Mirror that all dealt with the experience of dreams, and those were based on my own dreams. But aesthetically, visually, they were very similar to the story of Land of Dreams. They were female protagonists, were all with a woman with big eyes, short, wearing black, similar outfits, always in nature, in the desert, in the forest, in the sea. And so actually this 4 body of work were very interconnected. And they were always about women who somehow were very strange and didn't really belong to this planet very easily. And so the state of dreams and illusions was really a part of their story. And they're very compatible, very, very similar. So that was another additional thing, the way that we integrated different images from different work that together created one story.
And I also love, this happens pretty routinely, but we never expect it. Because the design and the editorial efforts are on these parallel but separate tracks when we're putting together the magazine, and we do look at the designer's contribution as a discrete component of the issue, yet we end up with these interesting affinities between the art and the stories usually. And especially in this case, because you had these 3 films that you call the Dreamers, so the Saw, Roja, and Mirrors and Illusions, we had 3 stories in this issue. So there was the ability to pair a body of work with a particular story, and then the Land of Dreams was kind of the framing device that started and ended and wove throughout. That was really cool to see, I thought. Also, when you were talking about some of those original ideas, like the woman in a landscape, what's real, what's illusion, not even a sense of place. Is it Iran? Is it the US? Like, all those things are so interesting and make your work open to interpretation. And we do see those ideas manifested. Hopefully most of our participants have this beautiful edition, but we do have it available on our website for anyone who still needs a copy. I thought too, frequently when I think about translating film to print, there's a sense that you're losing something because the format's different, the experience is different. And I don't know if for you, it's the fluidity is aided by the fact that you naturally work with still photographs as well as film. But I thought your choices, like using threads for the images, just makes it seem so cinematic. And that, sorry, I'm not very good at doing this, but that's how the images are throughout. It's really these very cinematic landscapes, and it feels very immersive to me.
It's interesting because a lot of people see my photographic work very differently than the video. But in fact, every single frame of every video is a photograph in the way I work. And they're very, very carefully shot and designed and composed. And so I find it very flattering to be able to make a book that only focuses on film stills, which to me are fully photographs. They're never exhibited, but they are from the eye of a photographer, and they're very consistent. Of course, my photographic work, a lot of them have calligraphy. These don't, and I think there's a great freedom for me because in my photographic work, I have no background. It's usually very sculptural, a character behind a gray or white background, and everything is focused on the body but with the film stills, with my video work, what's really important is the importance of landscape, architecture, and the emotions of the character, because in my photographic work, they're very stoic, they're very controlled emotions. Where I think in my video, the character gets to perform because I'm like Sheila Vand is a very well-established actress. And so there's a performative quality to these images of the characters. So there are some parallels in terms of how my eye works, my vision works aesthetically, visually on these film stills that are similar to my photographic work. But yet they also depart from my photographic work, not only by the use of landscape, but the way in which there is no calligraphy. In fact, the emotions are expressed by the character, by their gaze, by their body and postures, etc. Roja running, or Sarah drowning, or Sheila Simin, it's in the state of anguish, and so. For me, this always has been a very interesting challenge, is how I can go back to studio photography and make this very controlled, staged pictures, portraits, and yet go to the open landscape and use nature in a big way, and also be a storyteller at the same time with the photograph, if that makes sense. So I don't have to only rely on the calligraphy and the composition of that body, but I can tell the idea from the expansion of the space, the architecture, the everything that is in that image. And that's kind of liberating. And I've always loved that about video and film, that it gives you so much freedom, even choreography and all of that I don't give myself that in a studio photography. And I think this book that we did together, it's one of the only books that I have worked on that only gives room to my film stills, which are, in my mind, they're photographs. They're just not shot with it, but they really reiterate my interest in creating videos and films that every single frame, it's a photograph in my eye.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I recently rewatched Women Without Men, and I was struck anew by how every frame really looked like an artwork. It really looks like it's intended to be a still almost. And so to think that that's your mindset going in, it's not surprising, but it also makes me feel a little overwhelmed on your behalf by how much work goes into making your films.
That's when the storyboards come helpful. I think it's a real challenge, because I've been criticized by friends and critics saying, oh, this is also like highly stylized and visual, and we're just interested in the story. But I'm a storyteller that tells the story through images. For example, I shy away from dialogues as much as possible. I'm terrible with words. But I really do think that it's possible like you see in most of my video installations, there's hardly any language. It's possible to tell a full story that lasts as long as 15-20 minutes without any use of words, and that the images are very provocative and are very telling. And I think it can engage the audience. So that's been my sort of, not expertise, but that's been my love of working with film, silent films, as much as possible. But when it comes to feature films, of course, I work with script writers and consultants, and then I'm told, of course, you have to have dialogues. People get bored, one pretty picture after another. So I understand that becomes a problem. So, we try to balance it also with, that's why it takes like 6 years to make a movie, because there's so much to balance in terms of the way in which we want to create a film that is my vision, in the way that is not overwhelming the audience with pictures, but at the same time, and the picture is the dominant force in terms of the storytelling, and I think slowly I've grown to like dialogues, like when it comes very strongly with force and, very minimally, but has its impact and leaves. Songs, I like very much using songs and music in the films. But it's been really, I think we're talking about just the right point here. It's been for me a very interesting journey, questioning what is my obsession with still photography, video, which is very differently than feature-length film. What are the challenges and the issues that I battle with from a point of view of someone who's, again, coming from the art world.
And you began your art practice with photography, is that right?
Well, I actually was a failed painter, so I basically destroyed every evidence of it. I'm not even a photographer. I don't own a camera. I was obsessed with photography as a medium that really interested me a lot, where you could take something that it connects to reality, but then subvert it and change the reality. I'm very interested in magic realism, surrealism, dreams. So then I invited friends to, help me, and I often became the subject of my photographs. So that's how it began. But I'm very technically involved with lighting, with editing, with working with the labs, with the composition. I direct the photography as like a filmmaker, a director who works with a cinematographer, but you direct the film. So actually the way my relationship with my photographer friends are that I'm the director of photography. And I work with very special few people, because it's hard to change partners in that way, so they can understand where I'm coming from.
And as you were talking about the works you've done with the calligraphy on the images, I remember also when we were talking about some design ideas and the mood book, you suggested that maybe you would write notes on some of the images. And I wondered if that's part of your normal practice when you're assembling this kind of mood book for a project. Might you include notes, or is that something that you do more for an audience?
To open the door for my dog.
Oh.
Are you hinting at the use of calligraphy on the images? Is that what you're talking?
Yeah.
I have to say that, oh boy, this is like, my obsession with text over the image, it goes back to where I come from. I'm Iranian, and I remember the longest time, growing up in places where text was incorporated in the rugs that we sat in the ceiling, in the architecture of the mosque, in Persian miniatures were illustrations of paintings mixed with poetry, or sometimes there was sacred writing like Quranic text mixed in the architecture, the vessels we ate food in, some of the jewelry. So this integration of text and image, it was such an integral part of Iranian Persian culture, going back both to Islamic and Persian tradition. And so And then fast forward, my obsession with literature and poetry, especially coming from a country that is inundated with great ancient mystic and poets to contemporary poets. So when I started to work on photography, I thought that it would be very interesting now to integrate the text over these bodies. It was all very conceptual, because it was particularly called Women of Allah, where the images of women who were very silent and submissive, and yet this writing over their faces or their hands or their feet became a kind of a voice, and they became a projection of what is it that they're trying to express that they cannot. So it was very intentional conceptually. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't ever a sacred text. It was always poetry, and mostly poetry written by Iranian women. So that's how it started. Again, obsession with literature, poetry, and the way in which it echoed back my interest in Islamic and Persian art. So in a way, my images became a form of elaboration of classic Islamic and Persian art in their sense of symmetry, repetition, void, harmony, abstraction, so yeah, all of my sources, inspirations came from that part of the world, but the conceptual approach came from my Western education in the West.
And I know you've talked about, you've talked a lot today already about how literature has been a source of inspiration for you. And as we had conversations about the magazine design, you mentioned a few of these inspirations. I know, see, I'd written down some notes. I think Palace of Dreams by Ismail Kadari was an inspiration for Land of Dreams. The Wind, which was a book originally by Dorothy Scarborough and became the silent film with Lillian Gish in 1928. Kafka's The Trial, that those have all shaped. Certainly you can see that in Land of Dreams. And I think with the landscape that you've returned to and that you've talked about returning to also.
That's interesting. The books that you mentioned, Palace of Dreams by Ismail Kadir, and The Wind, and The Trial, and Woman Without Men, the great novella by Shanush Parsipur, they're all in the nature of magic realism, surrealism. So you can see the way I gravitate towards literature, that it doesn't quite land in reality. Like I'm not interested in pure reality. And also poetic language is in that way, that although it makes references to realities, it's usually nothing quite makes sense. It's very symbolic. It's very metaphoric. So I love the use of metaphors, and yet the work is always politically charged. And so I get huge amounts of inspiration from writers, but particularly the ones that, Marquez is another example, people whose work, it's so much full of history and politics, and yet is also touching on existential issues. It's just so profound in a way that, and Palace of Dreams is a masterpiece of literature, and Woman Without Men was truly, they say this nature of literature is the hardest books to translate into a screenplay for a movie. I cannot believe we succeeded in doing it, whether we did a good job or not, but it really is hard to take literature that is written in nature of surrealism and magic realism and make that into a film. I tried with Palace of Dreams, but part of the problem was there's not a single woman in the story, but also it was quite epic and quite magical. Not so much magical, but it was quite complex undertaking. But yeah, I take a lot of inspiration from this type of literature.
I think it's very apparent in your works that, well, not only that the themes are there, but that you're able to create visuals that tell these very complicated stories, and stories that I think are easier for a reader oftentimes because we have our imaginations at play than people who are being told a story visually. And I think that's one of the things that's so incredible about your work, is that there's room for the audience to participate in interpreting what they're seeing and in understanding the story, relating it to themselves. And, you know, even looking at this short list of inspirations, and you've made very modern films from them, you know, sources that are many decades old. And it's interesting. Do you feel like you're always drawn, because I know you're also actively engaged in modern contemporary issues, particularly women life freedom has been a big thing that you've been involved in lately. But it seems like you find a way to take old lasting inspirations and really sift them through a modern lens and make it feel relevant, applicable.
I think that approach has something to do with me being bicultural. You know, I'm Iranian and very Iranian. I'm very connected to the Iranian community. My family still lives there. I speak fluent, even though I've been here a long time. Yet my upbringing has been mostly in America. I've studied here. I live in New York. And so I have a very Western lifestyle at the same time. And when it comes to my art, very often the ideas, the stories are rooted in where I come from, maybe because I have such an unresolved relationship with my country and obsessions. But yet, they're never only about Iran or only speaking to Iranian people. I think when an artist leaves their place of origin, they're never ever able to completely address one audience, one public or one source. They are only able to or ever speak truths about that culture to anywhere else because of their distance. The only thing they can do, and this is to the advantage, is to be able to have multiple audiences and make work that asks for multiple interpretations. So plus the fact that as an artist, I have zero interest to tell people what to think, what is right and what is wrong. Rather, I'm very, very interested in social political realities, obviously. And I would like to focus on them and create, as an artist, narratives and images that are provocative and make people think about it, but never do I want to think for them. And that's a problem, because sometimes if the work, for example, the latest work, The Fury, which is about sexual assault and sexual exploitation at political prisoner women, prisoners, rape and as torture. Well, but then the work becomes very stylized and really goes to many different places, and it reaches, the story becomes very cross international because she's in New York then. But yet for many people, the subject is so raw and so close to them. And so they have very difficult time separating their raw emotions from the main theme of this work. So they cannot look at it anymore as a work of art. They immediately impose their own judgment. So, this open interpretation and the fact that I am not telling anyone what is right or wrong, or who is this what is this person feeling, but just creating a bunch of emotions that people can just navigate through it. It's a complex effort, and sometimes it leads to very harsh reactions. Sometimes people really relate to it, but going back to your point, is that you know, making films that is not intended to be for a particular audience, it's wonderful, but it's very complicated, because of the fact that each person arrives to the work with their preconceived idea of that theme, but also their relationship to art and film will be limited, or maybe some people do. So they have no reference to it as a work of art sometimes, but then some people do. So it's just very complicated. And I've done different work that has been politicized in different degree, and I find the one that are least political, they're easier to digest, you know. And the last thing I want to say, women like freedom, I as an activist would have no trouble to distinguish between what is right and wrong, but I would never want to make work of art that distinguishes between right and wrong. I think that is not art, that is propaganda, and I have zero interest in making propaganda. I want to make work that would outlive us, and one day people would look at it and still relate and is relevant to their time. And so I have no interest in, pointing fingers, but I have strong emotions and hatred for the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I'm fully in support of the movement of the revolution and very engaged.
I want to quickly remind our audience that if you have questions for Shirin, please just type it into the chat, and we'll be happy to get to those in a few minutes. I want to backtrack a little bit to talking again about the process with the magazine. I was mentioning that we came in, you had the mood book idea that we were really exploring, and then the logistics forced us to rethink some of it a little bit. And I had been struck previously by the fact that filmmakers seem really good at pivoting when we run into constraints like that kind of force us to shift our approach. And a previous filmmaker we worked with said he thought it's because making the magazine is very similar to the experience of filmmaking. You have budgets, actor availability, location availability, funding, all these things that might constrain the project or force you to pivot. And I wondered if you feel like your filmmaking experiences have helped you in any way as you work on other projects.
I always say I compare filmmaking to moving mountains, at least for me, the kind of films that I make, that's why they take 6 years. I'm very, very used to parameters. In fact, I'm very good at giving myself boundaries. I always seem to achieve what I aim for, but it's always working around limits. I've never been one who's been given an infinite amount of money or infinite amount of time or infinite possibilities. For me, every project has been a struggle and a challenge artistically and professionally. And I've been committed to it and clinged on it regardless. From beginning to the end, I guarded it. And understanding and accepting the boundaries are part of the game. We made a film during COVID, The Land of Dreams, and talking about limitations and boundaries. But it was one of the more invigorating experiences at the same time, because we just wanted to finish the film and not get sick. I mean, it's just surreal. And we did, and then we finished the film. So I think, whenever I set out a new project, a collaboration with you or something of my own, I spend a lot of time living with it and accepting, what is the core idea that I don't want to compromise, that I want to protect. But some of the things I could let go, I could sacrifice, they don't matter, And I think that's the job of an artist or a director, that you don't compromise the most important factor, but you understand other things that, it's like editing a script or editing a film. You sacrifice some of the most beautiful shots because they're beautiful, but they're not helping the film. Or you cut the film short and it's like, oh, I don't want to, but you have to. So sometimes it's just better to be concise, but minimal. And I think that's the approach that I take in anything I do, but protect what is the very, very heart of an idea. If you let that go, then it's nothing.
You've talked about a link between some of your previous projects, and it seems to me that working on a project will sometimes spark another related idea. And in our conversations, you've mentioned before an idea about potentially exploring more with the Land of Dreams characters or taking that in a different direction. I wonder, when you start with a project, do you ever know from the beginning, this is something I'm gonna want to revisit in other ways, or do you sometimes surprise yourself with a project that seems open to revisiting or taking a step further?
Every single time I've made a new project has been an idea that was founded in previous project, and then a seed of an idea came forward and then moved to the next. For example, Dreamers were my obsession with dreams of my own dreams. So I shot 3 short videos that each were more or less based on my own dreams. But Land of Dreams movie and the video was about someone who played me, the artist or Iranian woman artist, now collected other people's dreams and reenacted other people's dreams. So it started with my dreams and making films about my dreams. And then the protagonists look like me. I mean, they're a younger version than me, but they were women that were my muses and became an extension of me. And then Simin became the 4th woman, but now she didn't go after her own dream, but actually she was collecting other people's dream. Currently, I'm dreaming of another project which takes Simin to the next level, 10 years from now, and where she's at now in America. So had it not been for Roja and Sarah and Illusions and Mirror, Land of Dreams would not have been born. And then had it not been for, and the same for my photography, had it not been for Woman of Allah and the reaction I got and the experiences that I had with this extremely political reaction, I wouldn't have moved toward video, that was just totally opposite. And had it not been for video, I would not have moved to movie making and then as well as thematically. So it's just a chain of effects of different experiences that push you to the next step.
Mm-hmm. I see we've got a question here from Ali Reza, who says, thank you, Shirin, for being here. You're an inspiration to all Iranians. What's your advice for someone in the office job world who wants to dive into the world of filmmaking as a career change?
Well, the good news is I don't really think you need an education to be a filmmaker. I mean, listen, I didn't study photography. I'm a photographer, I guess. I didn't study filmmaking, and I'm making films. I think that it's not about techniques. It's not about technical things. It's about research. Is about, if someone is passionate about filmmaking, forget the school, but you can absolutely look at films. I mean, you need to know about history of films and really get a broad understanding of what has been already done. You cannot create in a bubble. But at the same time, I think if you have a single strong idea, all it takes is an iPhone. I mean, creativity doesn't require money always. I think you need to be free and not worry about what people think, whether it's going to be successful, whether it's about climbing the ladders. Don't do anything for career's sake, but do it because you're so passionate and you just wonder if you could do it. And just do it very secretly. when I have ideas, I do things I don't show to people for 6 months or a year. I just live with it. It's a very big secret. I think we all have secrets, and you just take your iPhone and take a picture of an ant on the ground, or put that next to something else. Just be absolutely free in your imagination, and then enjoy the process. Because I think what makes people nervous is, oh, I have to have studied, I have to know people, I have to have connections, I have to, no, it's not art, and it's not depending on all of those. It just grows inside of you.
That a lot of what you were saying echoes what we've heard Francis Coppola say for many years, talking about how he looked forward to or was excited to see tools like the iPhone that democratize the ability to make films. And it does seem like now there's so many ways people can find funding or find ways to just put their art out in the world. It seems like an easier time to do that now than in the past.
And it's beautiful when you finally find an outlet where you can create this world, this universe that is all yours, and you can just enjoy being in your imagination and disconnect from the world. That's what I love about art, is that, it's a great way of disconnecting and escaping the banality of everyday life. So I would absolutely encourage Ali Raza, if you have any passion, pursue your passion. Don't worry about anything, but don't do it because of career decision.
Can you tell us anything about what you're working on now?
I say it's,
or is it still a grand secret?
Yeah. Well, I have been, right now it's a very interesting time, is the strike of, writers and actors, and it's really a good moment to write, actually, because, but yeah, I'm dreaming, one thing is really interested me is madness, and the idea of women who have reached a state of psychosis or madness, whether it's because of sexual assault, political issues, or existential issues. But to me, madness and being an artist are so close. It's like, I love that. I think sanity, insanity, illusion, and reality, and everything I'm interested, the surrealism, magic realism. So the character I'm working on, again, a lot of this comes out of me and my own projection of myself, my own madness. But a woman who really can cope with the world as it is, and again, she stays in her imagination as a way to survive, and that imagination could be crazy to other people, but it is her sense of security and safety and love and creativity. And so I'm working on this character who is secretly an artist, but she doesn't even know what is an artist means. But all she knows is that when she's alone and she does all these things by herself, she's happy, and when she's out in the world, she's super unhappy. And the social media or the technology becomes her only outlet to the world, where in fact her audience are only virtual. They don't exist in reality. So I'm very interested in people who have this problem of disconnect and not what it means to them, that now, because of the digital and technological advances, their horizon has expanded to where they can have a community, even though they never really see them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm working, it's just a seed of an idea, but working a little bit every day.
We have another question from Shirin Abbas, who says, why do you think imposing your own opinion or seeking reality in a critical approach reduces or kills the artistic aspect of a video? As you said, puts it in the propaganda zone, although it holds no lies, rather critically, especially when creating videos about intense and conflicts. Sorry, it looks like maybe it was cut off. Conflict is what Shirin corrected.
I think I get her point. I don't want to be preaching to the converted, or I think that at least the people who follow my art, I think we're under the same political side. We know who is the evil, and we basically know we share same ideals, which is freedom and democracy, and we're against tyranny, oppression, and fanaticism, and so what would that contribute to if I make a work of art that tells you something you already know? What about making work that really questions the people or the actions that are evil, and really go under the skin of that to understand that? I just think it's too easy and too shallow to make work that so clearly points to a subject or a side that we all agree are so evil. I mean, what's the point, In fact, I never like to see work like that. I've never liked movies that are too didactic. I just want to think for myself, but also my work is never really framing issues that are so, they may touch on something, like The Woman of Allah was about the subject of martyrdom, but it went into a place that was far more philosophical, psychological, emotional. It really wasn't so much about politics, but it was about the woman who had agreed to be in that state of mind. The recent work, The Fury, which is so controversial, it's about sexual assault and how it creates victims. Without a doubt, Mahsa Amini was a victim. The victimization of those who enrages us and provokes us to protest in their solidarity and support. That was exactly what the piece was. And that was not saying that all the women are the victim, no, but it took a victim such as Mahsa for us to, show our love and support and compassion and solidarity, and show our rage. Our rage was unleashed, and we realized that we too are angry at the same source of power. So that was all it was. In all form of abstraction, it presented a woman who had lost a sense of sanity, it was sexually assaulted, and was powerless in the hand of these men in uniform. But at the end, what happened was that she provoked others to come to her side and rescue and turned into a protest. So maybe that's too long of an answer, but I can't do that. Maybe you look at other artists, for example, William Kendrick, some of the political artists that I would mention. I think his work also remains extremely poetic and intellectual and politically charged and beautiful, but very, very poetic and symbolic. Never talks about apartheid, but never does it where it's knocking on your head saying, see, that's not in the vocabulary of artists like him or me, at least, it's just too easy to do that.
Yeah, it does seem more interesting. I think it would be harder to not be so didactic, but it makes it more interesting for an audience member, and obviously it sounds like for you too. I think we have time for one more question. Kimmy Knight says she noticed it looks like you have puppets hanging in the background, and she wonders if you've worked with puppetry, and also what filmmakers inspire you in your work.
Oh, that's so interesting. Actually, I do have a collection of puppets and dolls, and I'm just like a collector. Anywhere I go, I I get this very cheap, inexpensive stuff from anywhere part of the world. And so I have, yeah, I have other, can I bring one out?
Oh, yeah. This is fun getting a show and tell.
Yes, I have
Oh,
another one.
wow.
I think that's from Polynesia. And I have some from Iran and some from, actually I went to Tunisia, and I just like things that are really well made, and I just surround myself with things that are without any price. I mean, it's not worth anything, but just little objects. I'm a big collector of little things.
And what about, do you have any comments of filmmakers who've inspired you in your work?
Yes, so many. I mean, talking about experimental films, Maya Deren has been absolutely, as an experimental filmmaker, amazing artist. You know, I go from, look, I won't deny it, David Lynch, Francis Coppola, to major Hollywood filmmakers, to, I'm a huge fan of Lars von Trier in Sweden, or Danish. He's Danish or Sweden. I think he's, I don't remember. I think he's Danish. Bergman.
I need Michael right here to tell me.
Yeah, I think he's Swedish. No, I'm sorry. He's I don't know, Danish, Scandinavian. Bergman, Kiarostami. I like you know, some filmmakers like Tarkovsky that are like poets, you know, and then someone like Bergman is so deeply psychological, and he's not as visual, although I think he's visual, but to me he's like a god, you know, of filmmaking. And I wanted to tell you as we end, I had a very famous filmmaker called Amir Naderi, who is Iranian, a very iconic Iranian filmmaker. When I was starting as a filmmaker, I said, do you have any advice what films I should see? And he said, I give you a list of 10 films that you should see, but make sure when you see them, write down the date, the day, and the hour you see it. He said, why? He said, because your life will never be the same again.
Oh.
And I was like, yeah, all right, sure. But can I be honest? He is so right.
What were the 10 films? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember. I mean, he's very fixated on Japanese Ozu, and he mentioned Tarkovsky, of course. Andrei Rublev is like masterpiece. You know, he mentioned he's very much into Japanese and Eastern European films. So I have that list somewhere. Kieslowski, I remember among Fellini, you know, he mentioned Antonioni, and then, of course, I mentioned many Americans. But I saw him recently, and I told him that was my biggest education, and that you know, people who help you, guide you towards Apocalypse Now is one of my most favorite films, and I love the documentary about Apocalypse Now made by Francis' wife. I absolutely love the challenges he went through. It's so uplifting to see that he finally made the film, even though he went through hell. So I don't know, I think filmmaking must be one of the most comprehensive, fulfilling, wonderful form of art, that it can be so impactful. Is visual arts that could be that powerful in a gallery and museum? Could you have that kind of profound experience? I guess you could. It could be almost like going to a church. Mm-hmm. But filmmaking, it can change your life. It definitely can. Then you can see it over and over again.
Well, as an audience member, it's so immersive. And so it's like all of your senses are engaged with, you know, whatever the film is. And as we hit 1 o'clock, my dog was just helpfully reminding us that it's time for us to end.
My two dogs are
Oh, good. They're so helpful in that regard. Shirin, thank you so much
Been a
for
pleasure,
your
and
time
I really appreciate
today and your time throughout the process of working on the magazine together.
and thanks to Matt Dillon for this very strong
That-
to of
yeah,
us.
so I will add, because I did think this was pretty funny. We were working with Matt on the fall edition last fall, and he said, you know who you should invite? Shirin. And I said, yes, and Shirin's on our list. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna give her a call. I'm gonna tell her she needs to do this. So thank
I
you,
love it for
Matt.
thank you for the trust, and no, really great questions from the audience. A wonderful way of spending the summer afternoon, and thank to anyone who was present. Unfortunately, I couldn't see, but it's really nice to have this kind of conversations.
Well,
Thank you.
it's such a treat for us. And I tell all my friends, I have the dream job. We get to invite our artistic heroes to collaborate with us and find out what wonderful people we get to work with. So thanks so much again for all
Inviting
the
you.
time and efforts. All right, Zuzu wants me to get off. Again, if anyone doesn't have a copy of this issue yet, it's available on our website, which is all-story.com, allstory.com. Thank you to Shirin, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I'm so grateful that you took a little time out of your summer day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.